The silence was the first thing Evelyn Carter had chosen. In the high winter of the Montana range, silence was not an empty room, but a living presence, thick as wool and bright as frost. It rode the heavy air, gathered itself in the pines, and pressed soft hands over every stray echo until the world seemed to breathe in slow, measured intervals. The cabin she inhabited for the season was a small geometry of wood and stone at the edge of a clearing, its windows squared against a cold that could unspool bone from flesh if given the chance. She had brought with her a trunk of books, a coil of handwritten notes, and the kind of quiet that makes librarians and archivists feel at home. For Evelyn, who had spent years listening to Margin speak, the mountains were fluent. By nightfall, the storm rose like an old god. The wind stepped out of the timberline and took the house by the shoulders. Snow drove sideways, a hard white river that erased the world with disciplined intent. Firelight made an amber island across the floor, and the kettle muttered on the iron stove, but beyond the glass, the dark turned to iron, and the wind found its voice. Evelyn held her mug with both hands and watched steam rise in simple spirals, each one a small sermon on banishing. She read, she paused, she listened. Somewhere in the endless howl, a sound broke that did not belong. It was not the slow cracking complaint of a freezing limb, nor the animal cough of shifting ice. It was sharp, concise, metallic, and final. It punched the night like a period at the end of a bad sentence. She set the mug down. Her first thought was mistake. Her second was gunshot. They paced around each other inside her skull. She stood very still and made reason list its arguments. There were hunters out here. There were machines that misfired. There were branches that snapped with a report if the cold was cruel enough. The wind shoved at the chimney cap. The fire sighed. Nothing followed. She told herself to sit, to read, to leave whatever lived in that sound to the indifferent storm. Instead, she went to the window and cleared a circle in the frost with the heel of her hand. Movement came and went like a trick of the eyes. A smudge in the white, then nothing, then something again, dark and out of place near the line, where the woods ceded to the clearing. She pressed closer. It was too still for an animal. Too large for fallen brush. The mind she had trained to sort evidence from rumor did its work even as fear loosened a thin thread inside her chest. Call someone, the practical voice said, but the landline buzzed and sighed in storms, and there were miles between there and help. Wait for morning, the cautious voice said, but the wind disagreed, piling drifts like shrouds in minutes rather than hours. Evelyn put on the parka she had hung by the door and wedged her feet into boots, made for work and not for grace. She drew a wool cap down to her eyebrows and pulled thick gloves over hands that preferred paper. The flashlight felt primitive in her grasp, as if it knew something about the night that she did not. She stood at the door with her palm on the deadbolt and listened to the layered violence of the weather. This was not bravery, she told herself. It was refusal. Refusal to let a shape in the snow become a story about how she had done nothing. The door did not open so much as it was taken. Wind seized it and shouldered in, flinging hard needles of snow across the floorboards. Cold burned her lungs on the first breath, a bright, clean pain that made the eyes water. She caught the door, wrestled it back to a near shut, and stepped out into a world where up and down were ideas rather than facts. The beam cut a trembling tunnel into the white. She saw the shape again, an ink blot 50 yards away that refused to be a log. Snow took her to the knees on the first stride. She learned a new mathematics. 3 steps and pause, brace against the wind, force breath, repeat. The clearing was a field of moving light where each flake held the beam for an instant and then gave it to the next. As she neared, the dark resolved into a man lying face down, the sharp edges of shoulders and the long line of legs already being translated by snow into a softer geometry. Fear arrived in a clean wave, every horror story she had never believed reaching for her name. She knelt because there was no sense in standing, and because the world narrowed to the 2 feet of space where her hands could make sense. He was not wearing a coat made for this kind of weather. The fabric was fine and dark, torn across the abdomen where the snow was stained almost black in the beam. She put a hand on his shoulder and turned him. He was young enough for the planes of his face to be uncompromised by time, older than a boy, the kind of age where strength sits behind everything like a second posture. His hair was dark, his skin was shock pale, and blood had dried at the corner of his temple. When his eyes opened, they were green like deep forest under cloud. They found her with a focus that had nothing to do with gratitude. His lips moved. The wind took most of the words and left her the shape of them. No hospitals, no police. The command fell between them, and then he was gone again, not dead, but gone. The body heavy and uncooperative. She hooked her arms under his and pulled. It was not a technique so much as a vow. The snow yielded, then clutched, and the wind tried to turn them both back into the earth. She did not count the distance. She did not think about the warm room or the open door. She thought about breath and grip and the way a human body could be both burden and reason. When the porch steps appeared under her boots, it felt like the world had remembered her. The door fought again. The cold came with them like a living thing. She dragged him across the threshold, slammed the deadbolt, and listened to her heart make a furious drumbeat inside the small house. The fire stuttered, then found itself, and the room returned in pieces. The quiver of light along the book spines, the low iron shape of the stove, the rug patterned with the tracks they had made. He lay where she had made him lie, the soaked coat a ruin, the shirt beneath it dark and wet. Skill was thin. Memory was stubborn. She found the first aid kit the professor kept under the sink, the one she had glanced at twice and forgotten. She cut the shirt. The wound above the hip was ugly, with the haste of violence, deep and ragged. Blood welled with a persistence that frightened her. She pressed gauze and held it there with the full faith of pressure, as a kind of prayer. He flinched. Life answered. She kept the pressure and counted a sequence of minutes that broke and reformed under the weight of uncertainty. When she reached to clear the fabric from his waistband, her fingers struck cold metal. The weapon lay there like a sentence. A sleek black machine, intimate and absolute. She took it away from him with the careful disgust one uses with a snake that has not yet decided whether to strike. She set it on the counter far enough from both of them to be a different country, and then returned to the bleeding because there was only one hierarchy that mattered. The wound slowed under her hands, the gauze grew heavy and then only damp. She taped fresh dressings as tightly as she dared and moved to his head, cleaning the cut with antiseptic. Surprised by the gentleness her hands managed, while her thoughts ran in a bright panic. She took his ruined coat away. She took his wet shoes and set them near the stove. She made a small mountain of blankets and covered him until he looked like the idea of a person rather than the precise outline of a threat. The gun on the counter watched the room with a single dark eye. She kept seeing it even when she looked away. 100 lessons about the world arranged themselves around it, and none of them suggested safety. She pulled a chair near the hearth and sat with her feet planted, as if the floor meant to move. Snow crawled across the windows in traveling patterns. The wind relaxed by degrees, as if it had made its point, and could now afford indifference. The room found its old proportions. An hour became a measure of tending the fire and listening for breath. Another hour arrived with the slow return of feeling to her fingers and the ugly certainty that whatever life she had walked into this cabin to find had been rerouted without consultation. She studied his face the way she studied marginalia, for evidence of a hand at work. The mouth told stubbornness, the jaw told discipline, the lashes told nothing useful at all. He was both stranger and thesis, a problem with blood on it. When he stirred, it began with the smallest contraction of muscle, a line tightening near his mouth as if he were fighting an argument in a dream. His eyes opened and were immediately awake. They went to the ceiling, to the fire, to the windows, to the door, to the gun, and then to her. He pushed himself an inch and failed, the pain making a low sound in his throat, not a complaint, but a fact. "The phone," he said. The words roughened but decisive, a command wearing the clothes of a question. She looked at the old handset on the wall and then at the wires she knew ran out into the storm like veins toward a frozen heart. The line was dead in weather like this. Or would be made to be, if men like the one on her floor had anything to do with it. She stood anyway and lifted the receiver. The emptiness that answered had edges. "It does not work," she said. The storm took it. He watched her mouth as if weighing the sentence for weight and lie. His gaze returned to the counter where the gun sat like a remembered sin. He nodded once, a movement that somehow expressed both approval and loss. "How long?" he asked, and she understood the rest. How long had the storm ruled? How long until the world could enter again? "Since the afternoon," she said. "It will be another day before the plows, perhaps two." His jaw tightened. He tried to sit again and made it halfway. Sweat stood at his temples, though the room was not hot. She moved without thinking, a hand to his shoulder to steady, another to the blanket to keep it from sliding. It was the first time she touched him without purpose, and even that was not true. A purpose existed, unspoken, complicated. "You need a hospital," she said. The sentence had to be built even if she knew what he would do with it. He looked at her, and the kind of certainty that could freeze a river moved into his voice. No hospitals, no police. The words she had first heard outside returned like a vow. The argument available to her was simple: infection, blood loss, death. The argument available to him was simpler: whatever waited in a hospital was worse. The silence rose again, not empty, not kind, the old mountain god taking back the room. Evelyn felt the decision she had already made settle into place with the weight of stone. She had chosen to open the door to the storm. She had chosen to drag him out of winter. Choice is a path that keeps demanding feet. "Very well," she said, though the words were a map to a country she did not know. "You will live here tonight." His eyes returned to the gun and then to her, and for an instant a flicker crossed his face. Not gratitude, not relief, something like surprise at the shape mercy can take. He leaned back against the pillow she had made from folded wool and closed his eyes, not in surrender, but in the disciplined rest of a man who knows his debts. Evelyn added wood to the fire. Snow softened its assault on the windows. The kettle, forgotten, began to whisper again, and the room smelled faintly of iron and pine. She poured a mug and set it near the hearth where the heat could coax it toward comfort. Above the roof, the night worked through its old arithmetic. Inside, two people shared the simplest kind of treaty: breath, warmth, light. The gun kept its single dark eye, and the silence, faithful and enormous, took her name and kept it. The blizzard surrendered slowly. By morning, the snow outside had softened into drifts so high that even the outlines of the trees seemed altered, as if the world had been rewritten in shades of white and gray. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to a steady orange pulse, throwing ribbons of light against the wood. Evelyn Carter sat motionless in the armchair, her eyes fixed on the stranger she had saved. He slept on the rug before the hearth, wrapped in layers of blankets that had once been her comfort. Every few minutes, she leaned forward to watch his chest rise and fall. The rhythm reassured her. It also frightened her. It meant he was still alive, and that the decision she had made, pulling him out of the storm, tending his wounds, choosing silence over reason, was now irreversible. She had dozed sometime before dawn, her body folded awkwardly in the chair, the taste of cold iron still at the back of her throat. When she woke, it was because something had shifted in the air. Not a sound exactly, but a disturbance, the kind that follows consciousness before thought arrives. She sat upright, the blanket she had wrapped around herself slipped to the floor. The man Luca Moretti, though she did not know his name yet, was awake. He was watching her. The firelight reached his eyes first. They were not the hazy green of confusion she had seen the night before. They were sharp, deliberate, assessing. His gaze moved across the room like a blade tracing possible exits: door, window, fireplace, phone. Then it came back to her. He did not speak at once, and neither did she. The silence was taut enough to hum. Finally, his voice came, low but steady, shaped by an accent that softened consonants into something more dangerous. "Where is it?" Evelyn frowned. "Where is what?" "The gun." Her pulse tripped. "On the counter," she said, careful to keep her tone level, "far from both of us." "I'm for and Ever for." He followed her gaze, found it, and exhaled once through his nose, almost a laugh. Smart, he murmured, though the word carried no warmth. He tried to sit. The effort sent a tremor through his body and tore a small sound from his throat, half pain, half fury at the weakness. Evelyn rose and moved toward him before she could stop herself. You should not. I should do many things, he cut in, his voice hoarse but precise. But at the moment I will sit. He braced his arm on the edge of the chair, dragged himself upright, and leaned back against the sofa. Sweat slicked his temple. Beneath the blanket, the fresh bandages she had wrapped were already showing a faint stain of red. You are bleeding again, she said. He ignored it. His eyes drifted to the window, where the storm was dissolving into a pale morning fog. How long? The storm? Almost 20 hours, maybe more. The roads will still be blocked. Ezra, he nodded once, absorbing this, then turned back to her. Your name? Evelyn Carter. He repeated it slowly, as if testing the weight of it. Evelyn. The sound of his voice shaping her name sent a quick, strange pulse through her. Then he gestured toward the wall phone with a tilt of his chin. It works? She hesitated. The truth had already been told, but it felt different now, in daylight and under his gaze. No, the lines are frozen or broken. It has been dead since last night. A faint muscle moved in his jaw. He closed his eyes for a moment, the kind of pause that hides calculation rather than fatigue. When he opened them, the sharpness was still there, but something else flickered beneath it, an acknowledgement, perhaps, that she had kept him alive. You should have left me, he said quietly. The words came like a verdict. She stared at him. You would have died. Maybe I should have. Evelyn shook her head, anger slipping into her voice for the first time. No one should die alone in the snow. He studied her, and for a moment, something unreadable moved across his face. You think this was mercy? He asked softly. You may find it was only a delay. Before she could respond, a sound cut through the hush, the low, distinct growl of engines. Evelyn turned toward the window, heart rising. At first, she thought it was the county plow, but as the sound grew closer, she recognized a rhythm too powerful. The vehicles that came into view were black, large, and moving with precision through the snow, tires crunching in practiced formation. Evelyn felt her stomach drop. Who are they? Luca's entire body shifted. The exhaustion disappeared like a curtain drawn aside. He pulled himself to his feet, ignoring the pain. Get away from the window, he said. What? Now. His voice was a command, not a suggestion. She stepped back instinctively as the first SUV rolled into the clearing. The doors opened. Men stepped out, dark coats, boots, faces hidden behind cold efficiency. They moved like a single organism, silent and disciplined. Guns glinted under the pale light. Evelyn's throat tightened. They found you, she whispered. No, Luca said, his tone suddenly lighter, almost ironic. They belong to me. He moved to the door, gripping the edge of the sofa for balance. Open it. Evelyn stared at him. You cannot be serious letting them in. He turned his head. His eyes were winter itself. Do it. They are the only reason you and I are not dead yet. Her hands shook as she reached the lock. When the door opened, a gust of cold swept through, followed by a man in his 40s, tall, lean, with a severe face that betrayed nothing. His gaze found Luca instantly. Boss, he said. The relief in his voice was controlled but real. We thought you were gone. Almost, Luca replied. The man's eyes flicked to Evelyn, then back to his leader. Who is she? She saved me, Luca said. She stays. The newcomer's expression remained impassive, but his tone sharpened. That's a risk. She is under my protection, Luca answered, the words precise as stone. No one touches her. Whatever argument lingered died unspoken. The man Matteo Rossi, as Evelyn would later learn, gave a brief nod. Two others entered behind him, carrying cases and medical supplies. Within moments, the cabin that had been hers was filled with movement. Voices in low Italian, boots crossing her floor, the smell of antiseptic and gun oil mixing with pine smoke. Evelyn stood near the corner, half invisible, watching her world being rearranged. The medic knelt beside Luca, cutting away the blood-soaked bandage she had placed with such care. He worked in silence, efficient and unemotional. Matteo watched everything. His posture, that of a soldier waiting for permission to breathe. Clean pass, the medic announced at last. Missed the organs. He's lucky. He looked up at Evelyn, and for the first time his voice softened. Your pressure dressing probably saved him. The words landed somewhere deep, but before Evelyn could answer, Matteo spoke quietly to Luca in Italian. She could not follow, but she understood tone, suspicion, practicality, something cold. Luca's reply came shorter, harder. The exchange ended with Matteo turning toward her, eyes unreadable. You will stay here until instructed otherwise, he said. No calls, no contact with anyone. Do as you are told. She met his gaze, surprised at the steadiness in her own voice. This is my cabin. It was, Matteo said simply, and walked away. The medic finished his work, taping fresh bandages, starting an IV from a sleek black kit. When he was done, Luca's skin had regained a trace of color. He looked at Evelyn, and in that look was something new. Not gratitude, not even recognition, but a quiet, deliberate respect. Thank you, he said, the words almost foreign to him. Evelyn folded her arms, unsure how to reply. You should rest. The storm is not over. He nodded once. Neither is the danger. As evening fell, the men outside set up a silent perimeter, their silhouettes merging with the tree line. The cabin glowed against the snow like a secret. Inside, Evelyn sat by the fire again, its warmth no longer a comfort but a witness. The man she had dragged from the storm now commanded soldiers with a gesture. The quiet she had sought had turned into something else entirely, a silence, heavy with guns and secrets. Luca slept lightly, his breathing steady, but his hand never far from the weapon, now resting beside him. When she finally dared to look at him again, she realized she had brought not a victim into her home, but a storm greater than the one outside. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled a long, mournful sound, carried on the wind. Evelyn turned toward the sound, though she knew it was not meant for her. The silence that followed was complete. The storm was gone, but its silence lingered like a bruise on the land. Outside, the snow stretched smooth and untouched, a white ocean that hid every trace of the night before. Inside the cabin, the air was heavy with the scent of antiseptic and burnt pine. The fire had been rebuilt, its light crawling along the log walls in slow amber movements. Evelyn Carter stood by the small window, her reflection faint against the glass, watching the morning unfold with the wary attention of someone who no longer trusted calm. Behind her, Luca Moretti was no longer the half-dead man she had dragged from the snow. Even wounded, he radiated command. He sat on the sofa, his back straight, a gray blanket draped across his legs. The IV line that the medic had placed still hung from his arm, but the weakness that had softened him hours earlier was gone. His eyes, those deep, unyielding green eyes, had returned to full awareness. He was not resting. He was calculating. Evelyn could feel the gravity of his presence even without looking. The men who had filled her cabin were ghosts of discipline, their movements sharp, quiet, practiced. They spoke to each other in Italian, a rhythm of clipped syllables and murmured commands. Every sound, the click of a weapon being checked, the scrape of boots on the wooden floor pressed against the fragile world she had built for herself. She turned when she heard Matteo Rossi speaking softly near the fire. He was leaning close to Luca, his voice low, his tone respectful but edged with concern. She could not catch every word, but she understood the shape of it. Questions. Warnings. Something about risk. Luca's reply was short and final. Matteo bowed his head slightly, then left through the door, followed by two others. Their boots crunched on the snow, the sound fading into the cold distance. The cabin felt both smaller and emptier. Evelyn stood for a moment, trying to remember the exact second when this place had ceased to belong to her. The walls, the books, the fire, everything she had thought of as hers now felt borrowed, occupied by a story far older and darker than her own. Luca's voice broke the silence. "You have questions," he said. Evelyn turned. He was watching her with that unnerving stillness again, his expression unreadable. "I have more than questions," she answered quietly. "I have no idea what happened here last night, or who those men are, or who you are." He studied her face for a long moment, as though weighing how much truth she could bear. "You will have some of the answers," he said at last, "but not all. That isn't good enough. It will have to be." He gestured to the chair across from him. She hesitated. Then Saturday. The distance between them felt both intimate and dangerous. He looked toward the fire, his eyes following the slow collapse of the wood into embers. "My name is Luca Moretti," he said, "and what you saw last night was an execution that failed." Evelyn felt her heart catch. "Execution?" "I was ambushed, betrayed. My men were outnumbered. The storm did the rest." He paused, his gaze cutting to her. "You found me before the snow buried me. And those men who came for you—" "Mine," he said simply. "They came because I am not a man who dies easily." Evelyn swallowed. "You are what? Some kind of soldier?" His mouth curved, though not into a smile. "That word is too clean." The answer was neither confession nor denial, but it was enough. She had read enough history to recognize the language of power when it spoke. He leaned forward, his voice quieter now. "You should have left me in the snow, Evelyn Carter." "I could not do that." "Yes," he said, his gaze pinning her. "You could have, but you did not, and now you are here." It's... Something in his tone made the words sound less like gratitude and more like a sentence. Before she could respond, Matteo returned through the door, brushing snow from his coat. He carried a small bundle wrapped in dark wool. "The men found this near the woods," he said, setting it on the table. Luca's attention sharpened. "Show me." Matteo unfolded the cloth. Inside was a small silver flask, tarnished with age, engraved with a wolf's head surrounded by olive branches. The crest shimmered faintly in the firelight. Evelyn's breath caught. She had seen that symbol before. Her father's footlocker stored in the attic above. She remembered the key she had found inside the velvet bag, engraved with the exact same wolf's head, a family crest. A symbol she had never been able to trace, no matter how many hours she spent combing through her father's old notes and books. Her heart began to race. She stood and crossed to the table, her hand trembling slightly as she touched the cold metal of the flask. "Where did you get this?" Luca's gaze flicked to her hand, then to her face. "You recognize it." "Yes," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "My father had something with the same symbol, a key. He said it belonged to an old family friend." Luca's expression changed, the way clouds change before a storm, subtle, then absolute. "Your father's name," he said quietly. "Marcus Carter," she answered. "He died years ago." A silence fell between them that was heavier than the storm had been. Luca leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he seemed to measure the weight of the coincidence. "Marcus Carter," he repeated, tasting the name. "That was not his name." Evelyn froze. "What do you mean?" He looked at the crest again, then at her. "Your father was not a librarian's father, Evelyn. He was a man who disappeared 20 years ago under another name, Michele Mielo. He was consigliere to my father, Alessandro Moretti." The words felt impossible. "That cannot be true." "It is," Luca said. "Your father was the keeper of our history, the one who held the ledgers that built our family. When my father was betrayed, Michelle vanished with those ledgers and with me. He saved my life, and then he disappeared into yours." Evelyn shook her head, trying to make sense of it. "My father was an accountant. He worked in billings. He was quiet. He was hiding," Luca said, his voice gentle but merciless. "He hid you, and the truth. He died for it." The room seemed to tilt. Evelyn gripped the edge of the table. You are saying my father was part of this? Luca's gaze softened, but his voice did not. He was part of the world that raised me, yes. A world built on loyalty, honor, and blood. A world your father tried to leave behind. Evelyn backed away a step, her mind unraveling faster than her breath could keep pace. No, she said, shaking her head. You are mistaken. He was ordinary. He hated violence. That is exactly why he was trusted, Luca replied. He was the only man my father believed beyond family. When the betrayal came, when Rafael de Luca took everything, Michelle saved what could be saved. The ledgers. Me. And then he vanished into the snow of Montana with a new name and a daughter who knew nothing. Evelyn pressed her hand to her mouth, her pulse hammering in her ears. She saw her father's face in flashes, his quiet eyes, his hands turning pages, his gentle voice telling her stories of history and loyalty. He had been her compass. Now he was a ghost wearing another name. The fire cracked sharply, and the sound brought her back. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because, Luca said, his eyes never leaving hers, whatever he hid, De Luca has been searching for it for 20 years. The ledgers are the key to everything. If your father left any trace of them, any clue, De Luca will come for you. That is why you cannot leave here. Evelyn's breath trembled. You are saying I am in danger because of him. I am saying you already were, Luca answered, even before you opened that door to me. She stood very still. The fire hissed. Snow slid from the roof outside with a heavy sigh. What happens now? She asked finally. Luca's answer was simple and final. Now we find what your father left behind. Before they do, he reached for the silver flask, turning it in his hand so the engraved wolf caught the light. The symbol glowed briefly in the flicker of the fire. Evelyn watched it, her heart caught between disbelief and an ache that felt like destiny. The crest was no longer a mystery from her father's study. It was the mark of a past she had inherited without ever asking for it. The stranger she had saved from the snow was not a stranger at all. He was the last thread connecting her to a history built on power, loyalty, and betrayal. And somewhere above them, in the attic, an old key waited, engraved with the same wolf, holding the answers neither of them were yet ready to face. The key was exactly where she had left it. The velvet bag sat inside the old footlocker, folded between her father's notebooks and the few books she had brought to the cabin. The silver gleamed softly in the thin light that filtered through the attic window. Evelyn Carter held it in her palm, its edges cold and sharp, the engraved wolf's head surrounded by olive branches catching the pale morning glow. The design was identical to the crest on the flask. The same snarl, the same curve of the leaves, the same quiet authority. She stood there for a long moment, breathing the dust and cedar scent of the attic, letting the impossible settle. Every detail of her father's life began rearranging itself in her mind, like shuffled cards, his careful smile, his silence about the past, the meticulous way he had recorded everything except the years before she was born. She had always thought he was a man who preferred solitude. Now she understood he had been hiding from ghosts. Footsteps sounded on the stairs below, measured, unhurried. Luca Moretti's voice followed, low and controlled. Evelyn, are you up there? Yes, she called back, her voice rough. He appeared a moment later, climbing the narrow wooden steps with a stiffness that betrayed the pain he refused to admit. He was still pale from the blood loss, but his movements were steady. The wound in his side had not stopped him from reclaiming authority over the air around him. Even in her father's dusty attic, he looked out of place, too deliberate, too composed. What did you find? He asked. Evelyn opened her hand, showing him the key. This, my father kept it hidden, the same crest. Luca's gaze locked on the silver piece. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Not surprise exactly, but recognition touched with reverence. He reached out, hesitated, then took it from her hand. The metal caught the light as he turned it between his fingers. I have not seen one of these since I was a child, he said softly. It opens more than doors. Othery. What does that mean? He looked at her, The green of his eyes darkened by memory. In my family, the wolf's key was a symbol of trust. My father gave it only to men he called blood without blood. Your father, Michel, was one of them. When the betrayal came, those who carried the key were hunted. Most were killed. Only 2 disappeared. Michel and me. Evelyn's chest tightened. So this proves it, she said quietly. My father really was part of your world. Luca nodded once. And it proves something else. He took the ledgers with him when he fled. If he still had this key, he intended to protect them until the end. He studied the footlocker at her feet. May I? She nodded. Together they knelt beside it. The act felt strangely intimate, like unearthing a grave. Luca's movements were careful as he lifted the old books from the chest. The leather was cracked, the pages yellowed, the margins dense with her father's neat handwriting. Evelyn traced one of the lines with her fingertip. He wrote every day, she said. Always with precision, always in code. I never understood why. Because he could not forget what he was, Luca said. He opened one of the journals, scanning the lines. He was documenting history in a language only he could read. Evelyn frowned. I tried to decipher his notes once. They are filled with historical references, quotes from poetry, old dates that do not match anything. It made no sense, and thought it possible. To you, Luca said. But to him and to my father, history was a map. They used the past to hide the present. He turned a page and paused. The neat lines of Latin, the small sketches of constellations, the margin filled with numbers, every page was a cipher. Luca's finger stopped on a particular entry. Here, he said, reading aloud slowly, all that I have I entrust to the queen who was sacrificed for a crown she never wore. Evelyn blinked. That's a reference to Anne Boleyn. My father used to tell me stories about her when I was a girl. Luca's brows drew together. Why would he write that? She took the journal from him, flipping to another section. Wait, she murmured. There is more. She pointed to a page written a week later. Her story is the lock. Her final words are the key. Luca straightened. He hid something, he said. Something that requires more than metal to open. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She stood, scanning the attic shelves, the old trunks, the stacks of her father's books. The one she was searching for came to her in an instant of memory, a dark green volume, heavy and out of place among the others. The Life and Death of Anne Boleyn. He had read it endlessly when she was a child. She found it at the bottom of the chest, its spine worn to softness, the cover edged with gold leaf. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first few pages were ordinary, filled with text and brittle paper. But near the middle, the weight changed. She slid her thumb along the edge, and a section of the pages lifted away in a perfect rectangle. The book was hollow. Inside lay a small black object wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax. Evelyn's breath caught. She peeled the cloth back carefully. A hard drive, cold and smooth, gleamed up at her. Luca exhaled a low curse in Italian. Your father, he said almost in disbelief, was a genius. He hid the ledgers, she whispered. He hid them here all along. He turned the drive in his hand, the faint reflection of light moving across its surface. No paper trail, no ink, a ghost's record. Evelyn sat back on her heels, the realization sinking deep. All these years, she murmured, I thought he was just an ordinary man. All that quiet, all that careful routine it was cover. Luca's gaze softened. He wanted you to have a life untouched by this. And now? She asked bitterly. Now I am standing in the middle of it. He closed the book and handed it to her, his voice steady. You are standing where your father wanted you to stand, between the past and the future, between what he saved and what must be done with it. They descended from the attic in silence. Matteo waited by the door, his expression unreadable. He glanced at the hard drive in Luca's hand but asked nothing. Discipline was carved into his bones. Luca turned to Evelyn. We leave in an hour, he said. It is not safe here. Once the storm clears, De Luca's men will come. Leave? Evelyn repeated. Where? To my estate. There we can unlock what your father hid. She hesitated. And if I refuse? Luca met her eyes. Then you will die for secrets you do not understand. The words landed without malice, but with absolute certainty. Evelyn felt the weight of them and nodded. Then I suppose I am going with you. Luca inclined his head once, the faintest trace of respect in the gesture. Pack what you need. We burn the rest. Evelyn glanced around the cabin, the books, the blankets, the quiet that had once defined her. It all seemed small now, like a memory she no longer fit inside. There is nothing I need, she said softly. Outside, the sun was breaking through the thinning clouds. The first light spilled across the snow, turning it into a field of shattered glass. In that cold brilliance, the two of them stood an archivist who had spent her life studying the past, and a man born of it. Between them, the hard drive gleamed faintly, holding the story of two families bound by blood and betrayal. Luca looked toward the mountains, his profile sharp against the light. Your father once told mine that knowledge is the only power that lasts, he said. Now we will see if he was right. Evelyn did not answer. She followed him down the porch steps, leaving behind the last of her quiet life. The sound of engines waited below black SUVs against the white expanse, their presence as inevitable as fate. As she climbed into the vehicle beside him, she caught one final glimpse of the cabin. Smoke began to rise from its chimney, dark against the sky. Mateo had struck the match. The fire took quickly, devouring the place where she had once believed she was safe. The cabin disappeared into smoke and flame, leaving only the road ahead, a long ribbon of snow leading down the mountain toward whatever truth waited for them both. Evelyn closed her eyes and felt the heat fade. Her father's key hung from a chain around her neck, its silver cool against her skin. The past was no longer buried. It was awake, and it was coming for her. The journey down the mountain was a blur of motion and silence. The convoy of black SUVs carved a path through the snow, engines humming with restrained power, their dark forms moving like wolves through a white wilderness. Evelyn Carter sat in the rear seat of the lead vehicle beside Luca Moretti. Between them, the small hard drive rested in a reinforced case on the leather seat, an unassuming relic that carried the weight of a generation's secrets. Neither of them spoke at first. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered. The trees lining the road stood heavy with snow, their shadows long and uncertain. The rhythmic sway of the car made Evelyn's eyelids heavy, but she fought the pull of exhaustion. Sleep was no longer safety. Luca's presence beside her was impossible to ignore. Even wounded, he emanated authority. The faint scent of antiseptic clung to him, but beneath it was something else. Smoke, leather, and iron, like the remnants of war. His gaze was fixed on the landscape outside, but she could feel his awareness circling the car, measuring every movement of his men, every sound beyond the windows. Your father used to tell me stories about these mountains, he said suddenly, his voice low, almost reflective. Evelyn turned toward him. You knew him that well? I was a boy when he disappeared. But yes, I remember his voice. Luca's eyes stayed on the road. He was quiet, patient. My father trusted him more than anyone. After the betrayal, he saved me. I don't remember much from that night gunfire. The smell of smoke, but I remember your father's hand pulling me through it. I remember him saying, "Stay quiet and you'll live." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. The image of her father, gentle, unassuming, overlapped painfully with the man Luca described. He never spoke about any of that, she said. He told me the world was simpler than it is. Maybe he wanted me to believe that so I wouldn't look too closely. And that whiz. Luca turned his head, his expression unreadable. He built you a life without shadows. That was his gift. His lie, she corrected softly. He did not argue. The road began to widen as they reached the valley floor. The snow here was thinner, streaked with dirt where plows had already passed. The convoy accelerated. Evelyn watched the frozen pines slide by and felt the strange vertigo of crossing a boundary she could never return across. The cabin, the blizzard, the quiet life she had once defended, they belonged to another woman entirely. When they finally turned through the iron gates of the Moretti estate, the world changed again. The property rose out of the mountainside like something carved rather than built, a vast structure of glass and stone that blended the elegance of an old Italian villa with the precision of modern fortification. Security cameras glinted in the trees. Guards stood at discreet intervals, their weapons slung low, their movements exact. Evelyn followed Luca inside. The main hall opened into light and marble, its high ceiling crossed by beams of dark wood, the walls lined with oil paintings that looked older than the country itself. Everything smelled faintly of polish and distance. A woman in a black uniform greeted them with a bow of her head. "Mr. Moretti," she said, her tone perfectly composed. "Welcome home." Her eyes flicked to Evelyn. "Miss Carter, your rooms are prepared." Evelyn blinked. "My rooms?" Luca's voice was firm but quiet. "You will stay here until this is finished. You are under my protection." "I didn't ask for protection," she said. He turned to face her fully. "You inherited a war. You don't get to choose whether it finds you." His words were final. Sophia, the woman in uniform, led Evelyn through a long corridor. Each turn revealed another fragment of the Moretti world. Sleek hallways with hidden doors, distant echoes of voices speaking Italian, the faint hum of technology beneath the marble calm. Evelyn's suite was at the far end, overlooking the frozen valley. It was larger than her entire apartment in Billings. The fire was already burning in the hearth, and fresh clothes in her size were folded neatly on the bed. It felt less like hospitality and more like containment. When she was alone, she walked to the window. The estate spread below in measured order. The winding drive, the tall gates, the guards who watched without looking. Beyond them, the world she knew seemed impossibly far away. She touched the key at her throat, the silver cold against her skin. Her father had lived in hiding, building a sanctuary of silence. Luca lived surrounded by walls of stone and men with guns. They were two versions of the same instinct control born from fear. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She turned. Matteo Rossi stood there, his presence filling the doorway like a shadow. "Mr. Moretti asks for you," he said. "He is ready to begin." Evelyn followed him through the hallways until they reached a steel-reinforced door at the end of the west wing. Matteo entered a code, and the door slid open. The room beyond was nothing like the rest of the estate. It was cold, functional, alive with technology. Rows of monitors lined one wall, displaying security feeds, maps, encrypted data. A long glass table stood at the center, surrounded by high-backed chairs. The war room, she thought. Luca was already there, seated at the head of the table. The gray sweater he wore could not hide the authority that clung to him. Beside him sat a young man with wire-rimmed glasses and a restless energy that seemed to vibrate from his fingers. "Evelyn," Luca said, motioning to the seat beside him. "This is Julian Vega. He handles my technical operations." Julian nodded once, polite but distracted, his eyes on the hard drive connected to a network of cables. "This is the device your father built?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Then it's not just encrypted," Julian murmured, running a program across the screen. "It's buried under multiple layers of custom code. If I make 3 wrong attempts, it self-corrupts permanently." "And the foe?" Evelyn stared at the display, rows of numbers cascading like falling glass. "So we have only one chance." Julian nodded grimly. "One." Luca's voice was steady. "The key is in your father's journals. Everything he wrote was deliberate. You know how he thought. You will find it." The weight of his faith in her was both terrifying and grounding. She opened the leather journal, its pages filled with her father's handwriting, neat, meticulous, coded. She traced a line with her finger, reading under her breath. "All that I have I entrust to the queen who was sacrificed for a crown she never wore." Luca leaned closer. "Anne Boleyn," he said quietly. "You told me that in the cabin." Evelyn nodded. "Her final words," she whispered. "That was the key. Her last prayer before she died was written in Latin. Ad Deum converto solis via. I turn to God. Grace is all that remains. Julian's hands hovered over the keyboard. You're sure? Evelyn met his gaze. My father never made random choices. He used history as code because he believed truth hid best inside knowledge. Luca's voice was calm but commanding. Do it. Julian entered the phrase. For a second, the screen went black. Evelyn held her breath. Then, with a soft electronic chime, the encryption vanished. A single folder appeared, centered on the screen. Its title was one word, Evelyn. Her breath caught. Julian looked at Luca, bewildered. This isn't the ledger. It's personal. Open it, Luca ordered. The folder expanded. Hundreds of files appeared, scanned photographs, documents, videos. The first image on the screen was of a small girl sitting on a library floor, surrounded by books. Evelyn gasped. It was her. Every file was her life birth certificates, school essays, childhood photographs, letters she had written and never sent, all of it meticulously recorded and preserved. He was watching, she whispered, tears rising. He never stopped. Luca's voice softened. He wanted to protect you. Julian clicked to the final file, a video. The screen filled with the image of Marcus Carter, older, tired, but unmistakably her father. He looked directly into the camera, his eyes bright with the calm certainty of a man who had already made peace with fate. My dearest Evelyn, he began. If you are watching this, it means the world I built for you has fallen. I am sorry for the silence I made you live in. It was the only way to keep you free. But if you are hearing me now, then freedom is gone. What remains is the truth. You are the heir to what I could not destroy. The ledgers are within this drive, hidden beneath my own code. You alone can unlock them. Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth as her father's voice filled the room. His words were both confession and farewell. He spoke of honor, betrayal, and a legacy stolen by men who worshipped power. He ended with one final message. Trust the wolf cub. He carries his father's fire. Together, you can restore what was lost. The screen went dark. No one spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the machines. Evelyn sat frozen, her heart beating in a rhythm that no longer felt her own. Luca rose from his chair and crossed to her. He did not speak, but his hand rested briefly on her shoulder, an anchor in the sudden storm of grief and revelation. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but certain. He gave us the map, he said. Now we finish what he began. Evelyn looked up at him through the haze of tears, and for the first time she saw not the wounded man she had saved, but the leader her father had once trusted. The wolf cub, the heir to fire. She wiped her tears and straightened. Then, let's find the ledgers. Outside the estate, the wind had stopped. The world held its breath. Inside, two heirs of a forgotten war stood side by side before a screen that held the power to destroy or redeem everything their fathers had died for. The silence that followed was not peace. It was the sound of history waking. The war room had no windows, no clocks, and no boundaries. It existed outside of time, a space built for vigilance and secrets. Evelyn Carter sat beneath its pale lights, her father's journal open beside the keyboard while lines of code cascaded endlessly across the monitors. The hard drive, her father's ghost made digital, pulsed faintly with blue light. Across the table, Luca Moretti watched in silence, his presence grounding her as she worked. They had been at it for hours. Her mind was a furnace of concentration, tracing the logic of her father's encrypted world. His ciphers were never random. He used history as a disguise, poetry as armor, and allegory as his weapon. Evelyn was the only one who could navigate that labyrinth, and Luca knew it. Julian Vega worked at the terminal beside her, typing in quick bursts, muttering to himself in half-sentences of code. This layer isn't financial, he said. It's linguistic. Your father built a bridge between text and number. Every quote hides coordinates. Evelyn didn't look up. He always said history was just math with better metaphors. No, Luca's lips curved faintly at that. Your father was not wrong. She turned a page of the journal, her finger running down a column of Latin dates. He references Constantinople here, she murmured. The fall of the empire, but the ledger's timeline suggests this is about a transaction land, maybe. Luca leaned closer, reading over her shoulder. His breath was warm against her temple. Constantinople fell through a forgotten gate, he said quietly. My father told me that story once. A hidden passage in the wall that let the enemy in. Evelyn's eyes widened. A hidden passage, she repeated. Then this isn't a metaphor, it's a clue. She looked to Julian. Cross-reference property records for land holdings in British Columbia connected to shell companies under the names Moretti, Mielo, or Lupo. Julian's fingers flew. Within seconds, the screens filled with maps, data entries, and scanned deeds. Found one, he said, a defunct warehouse built over an old railway spur. Abandoned 15 years ago. The forgotten gate, Luca said, nodding once. He hid something there. They worked without pause. Every entry in Marcus Carter's journal unlocked another layer, another connection. The codes were not just numbers, they were memories disguised as history. The fall of empires became bank accounts. The rise of kings became mergers. The betrayals of generals pointed toward secret transactions. It was a language only a man who believed in stories could have written, and only a daughter who had grown up inside them could translate. As the hours passed, fatigue dissolved into focus. Evelyn barely noticed when Julian brought her coffee or when Matteo entered and left again, his silent vigilance a constant in the background. The world had narrowed to her father's handwriting, Luca's low voice, and the quiet rhythm of discovery. At some point, Luca reached across the table and closed his hand over hers. Enough, he said softly. You need rest. She looked up at him, startled. I can't. We're close. You are shaking, he said. Your father built this puzzle to test patience, not endurance. Evelyn exhaled, the air trembling out of her chest. I just need a few more minutes. Luca's gaze softened. Your father would be proud, he said quietly. You have his mind. Is and in right. She looked away, blinking against the sudden sting of tears. He lied to me, she said. He kept me blind for years. He loved you, Luca replied. That is the only truth that matters. The words settled between them, heavier than silence. They returned to the work. The war room filled with the faint hum of machines and the flicker of screens. At some point, Julian sat back and rubbed his temples. We've broken the second layer, he said. What's beneath it isn't money. It's names. Hundreds of them. Luca's expression sharpened. Whose names? Julian magnified the list. The screen scrolled with surnames tied to corporations, political offices, law firms, people hidden in plain sight. This isn't just an archive, Julian said. It's an insurance policy. Your father documented everyone who ever touched the Moretti Empire, every ally, every traitor. Luca's jaw tightened. The true ledger, he murmured. He didn't just save the fortune, he saved the proof. And so I burns it. Evelyn leaned forward, her pulse racing. This is what DeLuca wants. If this goes public, it destroys him. It destroys anyone who ever worked with him. And it redeems us, Luca said. With this, we can reclaim my father's name. For the first time, she saw something almost human behind the steel of his expression, something like hope, fierce and reluctant. Julian was still scrolling. Wait, he said. There's another file here, hidden beneath the names. He opened it. The screen filled with a single phrase written in Italian. Chi tradis il lupo muore solo. Evelyn translated automatically. He who betrays the wolf dies alone. Luca stared at the words. My father's motto, he said. Your father remembered. A silence followed, long and charged. Evelyn could feel the pull between them, the invisible thread that tied their father's loyalty to their own reluctant alliance. Julian cleared his throat. There's still one last layer. It's locked behind a biometric seal, facial recognition, voice pattern, and a phrase authentication. Whose voice? Evelyn asked. Julian checked the metadata. Your father's. Evelyn's stomach tightened. So we need a recording. Luca turned toward her. He left you videos. One of them must hold what we need. They searched through the folder marked personal. Most files were ordinary clips of her childhood, school recitals, birthdays. Then Julian froze the playback on one entry labeled, "For when you are ready." Evelyn hesitated, her hands cold. "Play it," she said. The screen filled with her father's face again. His expression was calm, but his eyes betrayed urgency. "Evelyn," he said, "if you've come this far, then you have found him, the wolf cub. I trust him with you as I once trusted his father with me. The final key lies in our creed. Speak it, and the truth will open." He leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "Fides supra sanguinem. Faith above blood." The video ended. Julian entered the phrase. The biometric lock scanned the waveform of Marcus's voice, verified the pattern, and released the final barrier. The screen shifted, revealing a folder titled Libro Maestro. Luca rose from his chair. The air itself seemed to tighten. "Open it," he said. Julian clicked. The monitors exploded with data ledgers, transactions, offshore accounts, coded communications, all cross-linked with the names they had already uncovered. It was a map of an empire. Every crime, every betrayal, every secret buried under decades of power. Luca stood in silence, his eyes absorbing the empire his father had built and the corruption that had destroyed it. Evelyn looked at the glowing screens, her pulse unsteady. "This is everything," she said. "Enough to bring DeLuca down." "It's enough to bring the entire world down," Luca replied. His voice was low, almost reverent. "But used correctly, it will restore what was stolen." Julian leaned back, exhausted but triumphant. "We did it!" Luca turned to him. "No, she did." Evelyn met his gaze, and in that moment, the distance between them felt fragile, almost non-existent. She could see the exhaustion in the lines of his face, the ache beneath his control. He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, and let his hand linger for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "You are your father's daughter," he said. Evelyn's heart stumbled. "And you are your father's son." The words hung there, heavy with everything unspoken, the shared ghosts, the danger waiting beyond those walls, the forbidden current between them. Before either of them could look away, Matteo appeared in the doorway, his face tight with unease. "Boss," he said, "there's something you should see." Luca turned, all traces of softness gone. "What is it?" Matteo held up a secure phone. "A message from one of our contacts in the city. DeLuca's men are moving. They've been watching the mountains. Someone knows we found the ledgers." Evelyn felt the world shift again, the fragile calm collapsing. Luca took the phone, read the message, and set it down slowly. "So it begins," he said, his voice a quiet promise. "He will come for us now. It's Evelyn closed her father's journal, the final page marked with her fingerprints. The quiet of the war room had changed. It no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like the eye of a gathering storm. Outside, snow began to fall again, thin and relentless, a whisper of what was coming. The following day dawned gray and motionless, the air around the Moretti estate heavy with the stillness that comes before a storm. The sun was a dull coin behind layers of cloud, the mountains muted and watchful. Inside, the air hummed with tension. No one spoke of rest. No one mentioned peace. Every step in the hallways sounded like preparation. Every quiet exchange between Luca's men was a whisper of war. Evelyn Carter had not slept. The glow of the monitors from the war room still burned behind her eyes, every number and every name carved into her memory. Her father's journal lay open on her desk in her suite, its final pages covered in notes written in her own hand, now links, codes, and patterns only she could read. She had become something new in the space of a few days, no longer a librarian lost in solitude, but the keeper of a history that could destroy empires. When she stepped into the hall, Matteo Rossi was waiting, as though he had anticipated her movement before she had made it. His posture was straight, his tone clipped. "Mister." Moretti asks for you, he said. We are convening in the war room. Evelyn followed without question. The corridors seemed longer today, the silence denser. When they entered, the room was already alive with activity. Julian Vega was at his station, fingers dancing across the keyboard, screens alive with maps and live feeds. Luca stood before the main table, dressed in black, his shoulders still bound, but his authority fully restored. He turned as she entered. Evelyn, he said simply, as though her arrival completed the circle. What happened? She asked. He nodded toward one of the screens. It showed a satellite image of a sprawling warehouse complex near the edge of the city docks, its structure aging and skeletal against the water. Several heat signatures pulsed in red. De Luca's men, Luca said. They have taken something, or rather, someone. The next image made Evelyn's breath catch. A photograph, grainy and cruelly lit, appeared on the screen. A woman tied to a chair, her eyes wide with fear, a newspaper with a day's date placed in her lap. Olivia, Evelyn whispered, her throat tightened. My friend, she worked with me at the library. Julian spoke quietly. The message came through an encrypted channel. They knew how to reach us. It was deliberate. Evelyn forced the words out. What do they want? Matteo handed her a printed note, brief and precise. The historian for the ledgers. Pier 4. 24 hours. Come alone. The room seemed to contract. Evelyn stared at the paper, her heartbeat quickening until she could hear nothing else. It's a trap, Julian said flatly. Of course it's a trap, Luca replied, his tone even, but we cannot ignore it. Evelyn turned to him, her voice sharp with fear. He has her because of me. Luca's eyes softened, but his voice did not. He has her because he wants me. You are the bait. F's. Then let him have me. No, Luca said, stepping closer. If he gets you, he gets everything. The ledgers, the codes, the proof of his betrayal. He would erase your father's legacy and mine in one stroke. That cannot happen. Evelyn met his gaze, anger and desperation warring inside her. So we do nothing? We leave her to die? Luca's jaw tightened. I did not say that. He turned to Matteo. Mobilize Alpha Team. We strike tonight. Matteo frowned. He said to come alone. Eddie. Luca's tone was glacial. Then he will find out how crowded alone can be. Julian looked up from the screen. You plan to attack a fortified dockyard without intel on his defenses? Luca's reply was measured. We have enough. Matteo glanced at Evelyn. He'll have eyes on the approach. You cannot send a full team without alerting him. Luca's gaze turned toward Evelyn again. Then we use misdirection. Evelyn shook her head. He expects you, not an army. Enemy is construct's lock. He stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. He expects me to come for you, which is exactly what I will make him believe. She frowned. I don't understand. Luca's expression was calm, but his eyes burned. De Luca doesn't want a war. He wants a stage. He wants to humiliate me, to prove that I will choose sentiment over strategy. We will let him think he has succeeded. Matteo's voice was careful. You intend to walk into his trap? Luca's lips curved into a cold approximation of a smile, only long enough to close it. Evelyn's voice broke through the tension. No, I'm coming with you. Luca turned to her slowly. Absolutely not. You need me, she said, her tone steady despite the fear that burned beneath it. My father's journal, his codes there are patterns we haven't unlocked yet. You'll miss something if I'm not there. This is not a decoding session, Luca replied. It's a war zone. Then treat me like a soldier, she said. For the first time, he hesitated. Matteo's eyes widened slightly, but he remained silent. Luca studied her, and in that moment she saw the conflict behind his composure, the instinct to protect battling the recognition that she was right. Finally, he exhaled. You have a death wish. I have a debt, she said quietly. To my father, to Olivia, to the truth. Ithies, the silence that followed was broken only by the soft whir of the machines. Luca finally nodded once. Very well, he said. You ride with me. Matteo, prepare her. Body armor, comms, everything. He turned back to the table. Julian, you'll coordinate from here. Feed us visuals from the drones. I want eyes on every corner of that pier. Julian nodded, his expression pale but determined. Evelyn followed Matteo out of the war room. The corridor seemed longer than before, each step echoing like a countdown. Matteo said little as he helped her into the armored vest. You should not have insisted, he muttered. He listens to you too easily. Evelyn fastened the straps. Maybe he shouldn't. Matteo's mouth twitched in what might have been the shadow of a smile. He won't admit it, but he trusts you. That is dangerous. Is unstir. When she returned, Luca was already armed, the black fabric of his tactical gear molded to his frame, the bandage at his shoulder hidden beneath layers of armor. He looked every inch the man she had read about in old whispers, a commander carved from resolve. He handed her a small earpiece. Stay behind me. You follow my orders exactly. If I tell you to run, you run. Understood? She nodded. The convoy moved out at dusk. The mountain roads were nearly empty, the snow packed into hard ridges by the earlier storm. Inside the vehicle, the silence between them was dense but not hostile. The soft glow from the dashboard lit Luca's profile in strokes of shadow and light. He spoke only once. DeLuca won't be there, he said. He's too cautious. He'll send others to do his work while he watches from a safe distance. Then where will he be? In his fortress, Luca said. In the city. Watching the screens, waiting for proof of my death. Evelyn stared ahead. Then we hit him where he hides. Luca turned to her, a hint of something like admiration in his gaze. You are your father's daughter, he said quietly. The convoy reached the outskirts of the docks an hour after midnight. Snow drifted across the cracked asphalt. The water was black and still, the air thick with the smell of rust and salt. From their vantage point, they could see the faint orange glow of lights inside the warehouse. Figures moved in slow patterns, guards, armed, disciplined. 10, maybe 12, Matteo reported through the comms. Standard perimeter. They're expecting someone. Luca's voice was calm. Julian, begin the distraction. From the far end of the pier, an explosion shattered the quiet, a controlled blast that tore through the shell of an empty building. The sound rolled over the water like thunder. The guards inside the warehouse scattered, shouting orders. That's our cue, Luca said. He moved first, his steps silent on the snow, his weapon held with the ease of instinct. Evelyn followed close behind, her pulse a steady drumbeat in her throat. The night was sharp around them, every shadow deep enough to hide death. When they reached the side entrance, Luca signaled to Matteo, who placed a small charge against the lock. The door yielded with a muted thud. Inside, the air was cold and metallic, heavy with the stench of oil and dust. Crates formed narrow corridors, dimly lit by flickering bulbs. Evelyn's breath fogged in the dark. Somewhere deeper within, a voice shouted in Italian. Then came the sound she feared most, a woman's scream. Olivia, she whispered. Luca's hand caught her arm before she could move. Not yet. He signaled to his men. They advanced through the maze of crates, each movement precise, rehearsed. Evelyn stayed close, her eyes wide, her mind repeating her father's last words. Trust the wolf cub. They reached the center of the warehouse. Olivia sat bound to a chair beneath a hanging light, her face bruised, her eyes wide with terror. A man stood beside her, his gun raised. He smiled when he saw Luca. The prodigal son, he said, his accent rough. Your master sends his regards. Luca raised his weapon. Tell DeLuca I am coming for him. The man laughed. You will not leave this pier alive. Before he could fire, Matteo's shot rang out. Clean and final. The man fell. Chaos erupted. Luca's team moved like lightning, their bullets sharp and disciplined, each one finding its mark. Evelyn dropped to the ground as gunfire tore through the air, the echoes blending with the crash of the waves outside. Within moments, the noise faded. Clear, Matteo called. Luca moved to Olivia, cutting the ropes with a knife. She fell forward, sobbing. You came, she whispered. Thank her, Luca said, nodding toward Evelyn. She wouldn't let me leave you behind. Evelyn knelt beside her friend, helping her to her feet. Olivia's eyes met hers, fearful, disbelieving, grateful. Then Luca's calm crackled. Julian's voice came through, urgent. Luca, get out of there now. That was a decoy. DeLuca isn't watching from the docks, he's in the city. In his father's old office, the weeping senator. Luca's expression hardened. How certain? 100%. The transmission signal matches the coordinates from the ledgers. He's waiting there. Luca turned to Evelyn. You were right, he said. He's not running. He's waiting to watch the end of this himself. Evelyn met his eyes. Then we make him watch something else. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance. The night had shifted again. The rescue had succeeded, but the real war had just begun. Luca looked toward the horizon, where the city lights shimmered faintly through the snow. His voice was quiet, certain, and edged with something dangerous. We go to him, he said. And this time, we finish it. Evelyn nodded. Together, the word felt like a promise and a warning all at once. Behind them, the first light of dawn began to bleed into the sky, pale and cold. The warehouse smoldered, the water rippling with the reflection of fire. They stood amid the ruin, bound by the knowledge that there was no turning back now. The wolf had been hunted long enough. Now it was time to hunt. The city waited below them like a sleeping animal, vast, glittering, and unknowingly poised on the edge of violence. From the ridge above, Evelyn Carter could see its skyline rising out of the snow like a crown of glass and steel. The black convoy of SUVs stopped in the shadow of the trees, their headlights dimmed, their engines humming softly. The storm had thinned into a cold mist that blurred the world at its edges, muffling sound and light alike. Luca Moretti stepped out first. The night air carried the metallic tang of snow and exhaust. He wore a long black coat over his tactical vest, the faintest sheen of frost clinging to his hair. Beside him, Evelyn climbed from the car, the armor beneath her clothes pressing sharply against her ribs. Her fingers were cold around the silver key that hung from her neck. It had been a symbol, then a secret, and now it was a weapon just like the truth it represented. Matteo Rossi approached, his breath visible in the dim light. The building is secure, he said. No sign of movement inside since the last report, but the signals we intercepted confirm he's there. The weeping senator, Luca said quietly, as if invoking the ghost of his father's office. Evelyn followed his gaze toward the dark silhouette of the Vec Tower that rose over the frozen river. Its mirrored surface reflected nothing, a monolith of glass that held the city's secrets. Somewhere inside, Rafael de Luca was waiting, the man who had killed Luca's father, who had hunted her own, who had turned loyalty into ruin. The plan was precise, drawn like an architect's sketch. Matteo would lead the outer perimeter, his men sealing every exit. Luca's small team, 4 men including himself, Evelyn, and 2 operatives from his inner circle, would enter through the maintenance tunnels her father's notes had mapped decades ago. It was the same forgotten infrastructure that had once hidden smuggled goods and secret communications, a network of shadows beneath the city. Luca turned to her. Once we're inside, you stay behind me at all times. You direct us using your father's maps. No improvisation, no heroics. Evelyn gave a short nod. Understood. His eyes lingered on her for a fraction too long. If anything goes wrong, I won't run, she said, her voice steady. Luca exhaled slowly, as if resigning himself to the fact that she meant it. Then, stay close. They moved quickly through the alley that led to the hidden entrance. The city around them was asleep, its streets hushed beneath layers of snow. Evelyn's boots slipped once on the ice, and Luca's hand shot out, steadying her with effortless strength. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. His were calm, clear, but shadowed by something heavier than fear, a promise he would not allow himself to speak. The entrance was disguised beneath a rusted grate behind a defunct power substation. Matteo's men pried it open, revealing a narrow stairwell that descended into darkness. The air grew colder with each step, the smell of damp stone replacing the scent of snow. The tunnel walls were lined with old metal piping and abandoned cables, remnants of a forgotten era of the city's pulse. Julian's voice crackled in their earpieces from the command room back at the estate. "You're on grid," he said. Thermal scans show a handful of active heat sources on the top floor, likely guards. DeLuca is in his father's old office. His communications hub is still transmitting. He's monitoring the docks remotely. "Then he thinks I died there," Luca said. "Exactly," Julian replied, "for now." They reached the maintenance door at the tunnel's end. Luca paused, glancing at Evelyn. "Your father's notes mention an access point here. Where's the trigger?" Evelyn knelt, brushing her glove across the cold steel. She found a small circular plate near the floor engraved with faint Latin text, Fides supra sanguinem, the same creed her father had spoken in his final message. She pressed the emblem, and with a low groan, the door unlocked. "Always faith before blood," she murmured. The corridor beyond was empty, silent, except for the hum of power in the walls. They moved as shadows do, silent, deliberate, lethal. Luca's men took point, their weapons sweeping the corners. Evelyn followed between them, clutching her flashlight and her father's map. When they emerged into the upper levels, the contrast was jarring. The walls were glass and chrome, the air warm and perfumed, the silence of wealth replacing the silence of ruin. The sound of the city's hum was distant, as if filtered through water. Luca stopped at a corner, his hand raised. Through the narrow opening ahead, they saw the office, massive, cold, lined with art and marble. At its center stood a statue of a Roman senator with a carved tear on his cheek, the weeping senator. Behind the desk stood Raphael de Luca. He was older than Luca, broader, with hair silvered at the temples and eyes that glinted like polished stone. He was speaking into a phone, his voice low but edged with triumph. "Is he dead?" De Luca demanded. "Then finish the girl and burn the dock. I want nothing left." Luca's jaw tightened, his weapon rising. Evelyn's hand brushed his arm, a silent plea. "Not yet," she whispered. She pointed toward the wall behind De Luca's desk. "There's a hidden room there. My father's note said it connects to the panic vault. That's where he would keep anyone he doesn't trust in sight. If you eye smart..." "Olivia," Luca realized. He gave orders in a whisper. His men spread out like dark water, circling the office. Evelyn stayed beside him, her pulse thrumming in her ears. When he nodded, Matteo breached the door. It happened in an instant. The explosion of sound, the rush of motion, the shattering of glass. Luca entered first, his gun leveled, his voice cold and controlled. "It's over, Raphael." De Luca froze, shock rippling across his face before it hardened into disdain. "You," he said. "I should have buried you with your father." "You tried," Luca replied. "You failed." The guards at the door moved, but Matteo's men were faster. Gunfire cracked once, twice, then silence fell again. De Luca's hand inched toward a concealed pistol on the desk, but Luca was already there, slamming him back against the wall. "Where is she?" De Luca laughed, even as blood trickled from his split lip. "You think I would keep her here? You're still the same boy, too predictable. And Maine is also that." A muffled cry broke through the wall behind him. Evelyn turned toward the sound. There. Luca shoved De Luca aside and tore open the panel. Behind it, a steel door waited, its keypad blinking red. Evelyn pressed forward, her father's notes flashing through her mind. "The code will be a date," she said quickly, "something he would never forget." Luca's voice was low. "The night he betrayed my father." He typed the sequence. The door unlocked with a hiss. Inside, Olivia sat bound, eyes wide and wet with fear. Evelyn rushed forward, untying her, whispering assurances that sounded hollow in her own ears. De Luca saw his plan unraveling and lunged for the gun on his desk. Luca turned, faster. One shot echoed through the marble chamber, and De Luca froze, clutching his arm. The pistol fell to the floor. "You've run out of pawns," Luca said. De Luca smiled through the pain. "You don't understand," he hissed. "Kill me and you'll never find the rest. The network runs deeper than you know." Luca stepped closer, his voice ice. You're right. I won't kill you. He gestured to Evelyn. She will finish this. Evelyn looked at him, stunned. Me? You're the witness, the daughter of Michele Niello. Your father built the evidence. You'll expose him the way he buried ours with proof. Evelyn stepped forward, the weight of the moment pressing into her chest. He ruined my father's life, she said, her voice steady. He made him hide. He made him die afraid. She picked up the small recorder from DeLuca's desk. Now the world will know what you did. DeLuca's smile faltered. You won't live to show it. Before anyone could react, one of his wounded guards lifted a hidden weapon. The shot fired. Evelyn saw the muzzle flash, heard the crack, but felt nothing until Luca moved, shoving her aside. The bullet tore into his shoulder. He grunted, staggering but refusing to fall. His return shot was clean, final. The guard collapsed. Evelyn caught Luca as he swayed, her hands slick with blood. You're hurt, she whispered. He smiled faintly, his face pale. Just a mark, he said. Nothing fatal. Matteo's voice came through the comms, urgent. Boss, we have incoming. DeLuca's backup is 5 minutes out. Luca straightened, his pain swallowed by command. Extract. Now. They moved quickly, Evelyn supporting Luca, Matteo leading Olivia. Behind them, DeLuca lay slumped against the wall, alive but broken, his empire undone. Luca paused at the door, looking back once. You wanted to build a kingdom on betrayal, he said quietly. Now watch it crumble. When they emerged from the tower, the city was waking. Sirens wailed in the distance. Snow drifted like ash. Evelyn turned back only once, seeing the dark silhouette of the Vec building reflected in the river, a monument to greed and ghosts. Luca's arm was heavy around her shoulders, his blood staining her sleeve. It's over, she said softly. No, he murmured, his voice faint but resolute. It's just beginning. They reached the SUVs, Matteo helping Luca inside. The convoy pulled away from the city, leaving behind the ruin of the old world. Evelyn looked down at the key around her neck, then at the man beside her. His eyes were half closed, his face pale, but his hand found hers and held it tightly. Outside, dawn crept over the horizon, washing the world in a thin, cold light. It fell across their joined hands, over the silver key, over the blood that marked them both. The wolf's war was ending. But for Evelyn and Luca, the reckoning had only just begun. The snow that blanketed the mountains was cleaner than anything Evelyn Carter had ever seen, a world washed white by violence and absolution. From the tall windows of the Moretti estate, the landscape seemed infinite rows of pine trees heavy with frost, the faint shimmer of ice over the river, the sun a pale disk that could not warm what it touched. It had been 1 week since the night at the tower. The world outside looked untouched. The world inside was healing from blood. Luca Moretti lay in the medical suite, half asleep beneath soft lamplight, the bandages across his shoulder fresh and white. His breathing was steady now, the rise and fall of a man who refused to yield even to pain. The doctor said he was lucky. The bullet had missed the artery by an inch. But Evelyn knew luck was too small a word. He was alive because he had refused to die. She sat beside him, reading from her father's journal. Her voice was low, steady, the rhythm of a prayer disguised as history. He had asked her to read aloud while he healed, and she obeyed without argument. It made the silence bearable. The historian, she read, writes so that those who inherit power will know its cost. Luca opened his eyes, their green now dulled with fatigue but still clear. Your father understood what my father never did, he said softly. She closed the journal. He understood that power is never owned. It's borrowed from those who suffer beneath it. He smiled faintly. You speak like him now. Evelyn looked at him, her chest tightening with something unspoken. Maybe that's the only way I know how to survive him. They were quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled in the hearth, the sound filling the space where their words ended. Matteo entered briefly, checking on his recovering leader, and then disappeared again. He had become even quieter since the mission, moving like a shadow that refused to rest. When Luca spoke again, his voice was softer. You should rest too, he said. I can't, she admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I see it again. The lights in that room. The look on his face when you said it was over. De Luca? She nodded. He thought he could control everything, even death. Luca's eyes darkened. He was wrong. They both fell silent. The empire De Luca had built was collapsing. The proof embedded within her father's ledgers had already begun to surface. Julian and Matteo had spent days disseminating the files to international investigators, journalists, and trusted allies within Luca's network. The revelation was a storm spreading faster than any bullet could travel. Bank accounts frozen. Properties seized. Allies fleeing. Rafael De Luca's world was disintegrating. And yet, the victory felt strangely hollow. When Evelyn stepped into the corridors of the estate, she saw men she didn't know carrying boxes of files and data servers. The air smelled of antiseptic and espresso. Everything hummed with restrained energy, like a machine preparing to change form. She wandered into the great hall one evening, drawn by the sound of music. A violin played softly from a speaker near the fireplace, the melody haunting and incomplete. She found Matteo standing there, watching the flames. He shouldn't be working, she said quietly. Matteo didn't look at her. He doesn't know how not to. She stepped closer. Neither do you. Is Power 7D? For a long moment they watched the fire in silence. Then Matteo spoke. You changed him. Evelyn frowned. I didn't mean to. That's why you did. Matteo's gaze met hers for the first time. He was born for war. His father made him that way. But you, he stopped, the faintest smile crossing his face. You reminded him that the end of a fight can also be a beginning. He left before she could respond. Later that night, she returned to Luca's room. The fire had dimmed, but he was awake, staring at the ceiling. You shouldn't be up, she said. Matteo says the same, he replied, but I hate feeling like a ghost in my own house. She helped him sit up, adjusting the pillows. The nearness of him sent a pulse through her chest she tried to ignore. What now? She asked. He looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Now we rebuild. The Moretti name will no longer stand for corruption. The accounts your father secured will fund something real, legitimate industries, foundations, schools. We will turn the darkness into light. Evelyn smiled faintly. A redemption story. An empire of honor, Luca corrected, the one my father dreamed of but never lived to see. She studied him, his face lit by the fire, the sharpness of his features softened by exhaustion. And you think you can build that? I don't know, he said, but with you, I can try. Her breath caught. With me? Luca turned toward her fully, his good hand reaching out to take hers. His palm was warm, rough, scarred by years of fighting. You are part of this now, Evelyn. The ledgers are your father's legacy. You are its guardian, as I am mine. Alone, they destroyed us. Together, they might save us. Her throat tightened. You talk as if fate planned this. Maybe it did. The words hung between them, fragile and heavy. She wanted to pull away, but she didn't. His fingers brushed her wrist, light as breath. The moment was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hall. They separated instinctively as Julian entered, holding a tablet. Sorry, Julian said, oblivious to what he had interrupted. We have confirmation. De Luca's dead. Evelyn blinked. Dead? Julian nodded. He was shot in his hospital bed. 2 men in police uniforms. No witnesses left alive. Luca exhaled, his expression unreadable. So it ends. Does it? Evelyn asked softly. Luca's gaze met hers, and for the first time she saw doubt there. No, he said finally. Men like De Luca don't die, they multiply. His partners will try to reclaim what they lost. Julian nodded. Which is why we move now. The media has the files. Within days, the Santini network will be exposed as the foundation of your new conglomerate, legitimate, unbreakable, untraceable. But we'll need your authorization, Evelyn. You're the legal heir to the assets your father built. Her pulse quickened. You mean, it's in my name? All of it, Julian confirmed. Every account, every property. You are one of the wealthiest women on record. The revelation should have felt unreal, but it didn't. It felt inevitable. Luca watched her reaction closely. You can walk away, he said quietly. Take the money. Disappear. Build a new life anywhere you choose. No one would ever find you. Evelyn held his gaze. And leave you to fight alone? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I've spent my whole life running from shadows, she said. I won't start again now. Luca's eyes softened. You realize what that means. I do. She reached out and placed her hand over his heart, feeling the steady rhythm beneath her palm. You promised to protect me. I'll hold you to that, but I'll protect you too, in my way. He closed his hand around hers, his touch firm and sure. Then we rebuild, he said quietly. Days turned to weeks. The estate transformed. The men who once guarded its walls with rifles now walked the halls carrying contracts and business proposals. The war room became a boardroom. Julian replaced encrypted files with balance sheets, Matteo negotiated with banks and lawyers, Evelyn worked beside them all, drafting frameworks for the foundation that would replace the old syndicate. They called it the Lupo Trust, a network of legitimate enterprises built on the ruins of crime. Every night, she returned to Luca's side. Their conversations grew softer, less about strategy, more about the quiet things people say when they have survived too much together. He teased her for her meticulous notes. She teased him for his rare moments of patience. They laughed, sometimes, though neither of them could remember how. But even as the estate filled with life again, Evelyn sensed the quiet before another storm. Success carried its own danger, and peace in Luca's world was never permanent. One night, she found him on the balcony overlooking the valley, the wind lifting his dark hair, his wounded arms still stiff but healing. The city lights glowed far below like scattered embers. Do you ever wonder what it would have been like if our fathers had survived? She asked. He didn't look at her when he answered. They would have built the same world, only slower, maybe worse. We are their correction, Evelyn, their end and their beginning. She stepped beside him. Then let's make sure it means something. He turned toward her, his gaze steady. It already does. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them held a charge that felt older than either of them. When he reached for her, it was not sudden, but inevitable. His lips brushed hers, a kiss quiet and certain, born not of desire alone, but of recognition, two lives that had collided and refused to part. When they pulled apart, Evelyn felt the world shift into place. For the first time in years, she wasn't lost. Luca touched the key at her throat, his voice a whisper. Your father gave us the past, he said. Now we decide the future. She smiled. Together. Below them, the snow began to fall again, gentle and slow, erasing the footprints of everything that had come before. The Moretti estate glowed like a beacon in the cold night, and somewhere in its depths, the last of the old ghosts finally slept. 6 months had passed since the night the city burned. The winter had surrendered to spring, and with it, the mountain valley surrounding the Moretti estate began to change. Where there had once been snowdrifts, wildflowers now grew in soft clusters along the edges of the stone terraces. The river, freed from its frozen silence, carried the sound of running water through the air, a reminder that even the coldest world could thaw. Evelyn Carter stood on the balcony overlooking it all, a thin breeze lifting strands of her hair. The sun was just rising, staining the peaks in pale gold. Below, the estate no longer looked like a fortress. The high walls remained, but inside them there was movement workers, architects, young staff carrying folders instead of rifles. The Moretti Empire had shed its armor. It was becoming something else. Behind her, a voice spoke quietly. You're awake early again. Is Hall Azon. She turned to find Luca standing in the doorway, his gray shirt open at the collar, his arm still bearing the faint scar of the bullet that had nearly killed him. He looked stronger now, though the air of danger never quite left him. It clung to him like another kind of shadow, one he wore with the same control he had over everything else in his life. I couldn't sleep, she admitted. He joined her at the railing, his gaze following the sun as it broke fully over the ridge. Neither could I. Too much peace, maybe. The quiet feels strange. It always will, she said. People like us don't know what to do with peace. He smiled faintly. Then we'll learn. The words hung between them, gentle but certain. The silence that followed was not the one they had once known, the silence of fear or calculation, but the kind born from understanding. Down in the courtyard, workers were assembling the new sign that would mark the transformation of everything the Moretti name had once represented. Evelyn watched as the last letter was fixed into place, Lupo Industries. The symbol beneath it was the same crest that had once marked the family's power, the snarling wolf's head encircled by olive branches. But the lines had been softened, the edges remade. It was no longer a mark of secrecy, it was a declaration. Luca followed her gaze. It feels strange seeing it there, he said quietly. For so long, that symbol meant blood. Now it will mean business. It will mean legacy, Evelyn corrected. And redemption. He turned to look at her, and for a moment, the hard veneer of command slipped. You did this, he said. All of it. I might have survived the war, but you gave it purpose. Evelyn shook her head. No, we did this. My father built the foundations, yours built the fire. We just chose what to make of the ashes. It's marred. He studied her in the quiet morning light, something like pride flickering behind his eyes. You sound like a Moretti now. Then maybe you sound a little like a Carter, she replied, smiling. He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing the inside of her wrist where her pulse beat fast and steady. Do you regret staying? Evelyn looked out toward the horizon. I used to think I wanted to disappear, to live quietly, surrounded by books and silence. But that kind of life isn't peace, it's hiding. My father spent his life running from the past. I won't spend mine running from the future. Luca nodded slowly. Then stay with me. Not as an obligation, not as a shadow, as my equal. Her breath caught. He had said it before in other ways, through protection, through partnership, through the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. But hearing it aloud stripped the moment of pretense. I already am, she said softly. For a long time, they stood without speaking. The estate below them stirred with life, the clang of metal, the rhythm of construction, the murmur of new beginnings. Evelyn felt the faint curve of movement under her palm when she rested her hand on her stomach. The life growing within her was still small, a secret between them and the mountains. It frightened her and steadied her all at once. Luca noticed her gesture and smiled. He or she will never know the world we came from. Yes, that's the point, she said. He placed his hand over hers, his touch protective, reverent. Your father would have been proud. She felt her throat tighten. He'd have been terrified first. But yes, maybe proud too. The sound of footsteps drew their attention. Matteo appeared in the doorway, his expression as calm and unreadable as always. The board is waiting, he said to Luca. They are ready to finalize the merger contracts. I'll be there in a moment, Luca replied. Matteo gave a brief nod but didn't leave immediately. His eyes met Evelyn's for a moment, and there was a rare flicker of warmth there. The professor would have approved, he said quietly. Then he was gone, as efficiently as he had arrived. Luca exhaled. He still won't call your father by his real name. Maybe that's his way of protecting it, she said. Let the past keep one of its secrets. They went downstairs together. The main hall had been transformed into a space of light and motion. Laptops replaced weapons. Polished marble gleamed, where once there had been hidden safes. Around the long table sat people in suits rather than tactical gear, speaking of markets and innovation instead of enemies and betrayal. Luca took his seat at the head, Evelyn beside him. Contracts were reviewed, agreements signed. Each signature was another step away from the old world, a quiet victory sealed in ink rather than blood. When it was done, Luca turned to her. "It's finished," he said. Evelyn smiled faintly. "No, it's begun." That night, the estate hosted its first official gala. Politicians, investors, and journalists filled the ballroom that had once served as a bunker. Chandeliers glowed overhead, and the sound of violins returned to the house that had been silent for too long. Evelyn moved through the room with calm grace, every inch the scholar and strategist her father had raised, every bit the leader Luca had made her become. When she felt his eyes on her from across the room, she met his gaze and smiled. He crossed to her, cutting through the swirl of conversation. "You hate this," he said under his breath. She laughed softly. "I hate being the story." "You were never the story," he said. "You were the truth." "No." As the orchestra shifted to a slower melody, he held out his hand. "Dance with me." Evelyn hesitated only for a heartbeat before placing her hand in his. He drew her close, the world narrowing to the rhythm of music and breath. The moment felt impossibly distant from the one when she had first seen him bleeding in the snow, when silence had been her only companion. "You still look at me like you're waiting for me to disappear," she said quietly. "I'm not," Luca replied. "I'm just making sure this is real." "It is," she whispered. The song faded. Around them, conversation resumed. The hum of power transformed into something almost human. Luca bent close enough for his words to brush her ear. "You know, for a librarian, you've started quite the dynasty." Evelyn smiled. "For a crime lord, you make a decent businessman." He chuckled softly. "That's progress." Outside, the night spread clear and full of stars. When the last guests had gone and the estate had fallen quiet, Evelyn stepped out onto the balcony again. The moonlight painted everything silver. Luca joined her, his arm slipping naturally around her waist. The valley below glowed faintly from the new buildings rising in the distance, factories, research centers, schools, the legacy of two families reborn from blood and fire. Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you think it's over now?" Luca's voice was calm, certain. "Nothing that matters ever ends. It just changes form." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the stars. "Then let's make sure what we've built outlasts us." He kissed her forehead. "It will." The wind stirred the trees below, carrying the faint echo of wolves howling somewhere in the distance, not a warning this time, but a benediction. Evelyn closed her eyes and listened. The story that had begun in a storm had come full circle. The woman who once sought silence had found her voice. The man born in violence had found peace in loyalty. Together they had turned survival into legacy. And as dawn broke over the mountains, the first light touched their faces, golden and clean. For the first time in a long, haunted history, the wolves rested,